Welcome to day 3 of my COVID-19 quarantine code review, where I use my time in social isolation to review and improve one of the apps I built when I was learning to code 2 years ago. We're continuing to review this Minesweeper app that I built a while ago. It's available at minesweeper.zaklaughton.dev. So far, we have changed strings into template literals, and yesterday we started removing jQuery. And today I'm going to take it a little bit a different direction. I was planning on getting rid of all jQuery in the code, but I realized that that was a mistake on my part. If you watched a video from yesterday, it went a little bit longer than expected, and I ran into quite a few complications. And I'll talk about that a little bit here. And that's, kind of what being a developer is all about, is reevaluating, seeing what's worth it. I got really excited to remove jQuery because it's an old technology, and JavaScript can handle a lot of the things that jQuery used to take care of. But the more I went into it, the more I realized that my code is very tightly coupled, meaning a lot of the functions are very closely tied together, and it's hard to take one out without affecting the other. Let's see if I can see an example here. Let's open up the JavaScript here. And I wanted to get rid of, for instance, this check when here. I wanted to get rid of things like this $sign remaining text. That's a jQuery function, and there's several of them throughout the code. And but a lot of these functions depend on it. For instance, check when, that is not a pure function, meaning it reaches outside of the function to check on things, which makes it really hard to say, hey, I want to change this or remove this part of the code from this function. Well, that's going to impact the code somewhere else. And so I realized as I was trying to take out the jQuery, things were getting affected, things were breaking. And I still do want to get rid of the jQuery, but I can't do it. Software update. Not now. I'm trying to record, Google. Come on. So I'm trying to remove jQuery was just not smart. So it's kind of like having a tangled mass of yarn, just a bunch of yarn just tangled together, and you say, oh, I want to take out the red one. I just want to take the red one and pull it out. Like, well, you can't do that. You can be very tough, though. You're going to want to untangle all the yarn in order to pull out the red one. So instead, I'm going to focus on cleaning up the code and refactoring things to make it a little less tightly coupled. And you all saw it, right? I said don't update, but it's going to do it anyways. Interrupting my recording. So anyways, I'm going to try to clean up the code a little bit and make it cleaner for refactoring. And I think even in the process, we're going to be taking out some of the jQuery as we go. And then if there's any left over in the end, which will be a few videos down the road, we can knock out the rest of the jQuery. So what I'm going to be focusing on today is removing comments, comment cleanup. I like a lot of the comments I left. They're very helpful, but I think they're a little verbose sometimes. I overdid it a little bit. Particularly, you can see here with all my functions, I did this JSDoc, which gives a lot of information about the function. It usually starts with a description, along with the parameters that are taking in, the type of the parameter, and then a description of the parameter, as well as what it returns, the type of the return, and a description of the return. This is helpful and useful, but at the same time, it's kind of redundant, right? Like right here, we can see in the function name, it's saying make grid. If it says it makes grid, do we really need more information? Well, maybe this gives a little more information, but what if we could take that information and include it, say, in the function name without having all this extra comments here? I am firmly in the camp, and there's a lot of debate online about this, but I am definitely in the camp that code is self-documenting most of the time. If you have well-written functions and well-named functions and well-named variables, you should be able to see what the code is doing, for the most part, strictly from your function names. Now, there are sometimes weird things or weird business logic that you want to explain, or maybe something that looks a little off that goes against conventional ways of coding, and you want to call that out. There are great reasons to write comments, but as far as basic descriptions like this of saying generates a blank grid from an HTML table, I think we can get all that information into the function name without having all this extra lines of code here. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. Let's search through the code. Let's see how many we have. They all start with this slash star star. So if we search slash star star here in the code, we have 10 of them. So I'm just going to go through and see if we can get rid of all of them. Take a look at all the other comments too, see if they should be kept or changed, modified at all. And yes, so that's what we will be going through today. And learning from yesterday, we will test the code as we go. I mean, the comments shouldn't affect anything, but we want to make sure things still work, especially if we're renaming functions and things like that. Okay, so let's start with this first one, make grid. We have a description up here. It generates a blank grid from an HTML table. It takes in rows, which is a number, and columns, which is a number, and it returns a blank HTML table. I think we can make this a little clearer if we take make grid. Now remember, make grid is it's not only, so it's defined here, but it's used in multiple places. So if we search the document for make grid, which I highlighted it and hit Command F, and it's automatically searching for it, we have it here, and we have it here. So we want to make sure that when we change the name, it also changes there. To do that, you can go into VS Code, and you can either hit F2 or you can right click and say rename symbol, and then you can rename it, and that will automatically update it everywhere throughout the code. So we're going to rename this function here. Let's make it a little more descriptive so we don't need this description up here. Let's call it make blank HTML table grid. It's a little long, but it's definitely a little more descriptive. We might not need all that, but for the purposes of cleanup, I think it's perfect. So I'm going to just rename it that, and you'll see too, if we go back to search for what we had before, if we search for make grid, it's no longer there, and make blank HTML table grid has automatically been renamed down here. So that takes place of this description, right? You can see make blank HTML table grid. That's very clear what it does without having to go up here. If you were watching the video yesterday, I did a lot of that. I kind of like, okay, what's this function called? Make grid. Okay, what does that mean? What does it do? Now, all we have to do is we can get rid of this part, delete, and say, oh, it makes a blank HTML table grid. Got it. I don't need to hop around and look around. Rows is a number, so we have rows. I think we can make that a little more descriptive. Let's call this number of rows. Same thing here. We'll do number of columns. Oh, and actually we should do what I said before, and you should do the rename symbol, so then it will change the variables everywhere that it is declared, or everywhere that it is used. So let's do that. So number of rows. There we go. You can see rows here changed to number of rows, and I'm just going to use the keyboard shortcut for this one. We're going to do F2. And we're going to say number of columns. Cool. Oh, cool. It even changed it in the JSDoc here, which doesn't matter because we're getting rid of these two. And as far as the returns, it returns a blank HTML table. I don't think we need that because it shows right here that in the name it's kind of clear what it's returning. And we're saying return grid, which we could probably make that a little bit clearer too. But let's just get rid of this JSDoc and let's rename grid here. We're just going to call grid blank HTML table grid. I'm not a huge fan of the name right now, but it is descriptive and we can always change it later. It's definitely more useful than just grid. And there we go. You can see we took out all that extra lines of code, and we can see just from looking at the function what it's doing without having to hop between the commented out code and the function and seeing what's going on. Let's save it and make sure that the grid generation still works. We'll hop back to the browser. And this is the actual website, so that's not being updated, but I have the file open here where I have the minesweeper file that we're working on saved. So let's refresh the page, and cool, generated the grid just fine. So we are doing good. Let's continue on. Pick mines, randomly generate locations for mines on a grid. All right, we can do that. Let's call it instead generate mine locations. Perfect. Now we don't need that. Let's do the same thing we did before with rows and columns. Let's make this a little clear. Number of rows and number of columns. Awesome. Take that out. And it returns strings noting the location of mines. Well, that's not a very clear variable name then. Why would I call that mines? It's the location of mines. Let's, instead of mines, let's call this something like well, I want to say probably mine locations. We can indicate it's an array too, which it's not necessary, but it kind of helps in simple programs like this to say what the data type is, or at least hint at it. But if you implement a typed language like TypeScript, which we might do later, we won't need it. But let's do it for now. Let's err on the side of being over descriptive. We can always change it later. Mine locations array. Perfect. And let's make sure that still works. We saved the file, new game. We reloaded, right? Reloaded, new game, and make sure there's still mines. Still mines in random spots. Perfect. All right, moving on down. And a lot of these comments, like make sure there's at least one mine, I think we can eliminate these eventually by making a new function saying like check for one mine or check for greater than 0 mines. But we're going to leave that in for today. We'll just focus on the JSDocs for now. So isMine takes a square location and returns true or false if it is a mine. Okay, isMine. I think that's pretty clear. I think we can make it clear by saying let's call it is square mine. I'm debating whether I should call it square or a cell, but it looks like I already started calling it square, so let's stick with square. Is square mine. Maybe even is mine under square. Let's just stick with this for now. Cool. Square ID, location of a square. Okay, well then why do we call it square ID? Let's call it, well, square ID might be good. I think location is, I'm trying to standardize on terms here. I think location isn't used often. Oh, well, no, it's shown in lots of places. Okay, we do use location. Let's call it square location then. Square location. Boom. And then it returns a true or false, which I think is obvious. If you have a function that's kind of starts with an is, it usually means it's returning true or false. Is this something? Yes or no? Cool. How many we have left here? Let's get a running count. 8 left. Cool. Then, let's see. Now we have remove, and this one I hit yesterday. I was a little upset about because it just says remove, and what does it do? It removes an element from an array based on its value. This is a perfect example. Like, if I just came here to this function and saw remove, like remove what? You remove, okay, there's an array and an element. What does this do? We can make this much clearer. And I don't even know where it's used either or why it's used, so we can put it better in the context of Minesweeper too. But for now, we can leave it as is. But let's call it, so it removes an element from an array based on its value. Let's call this remove element from array. Perfect. And then it takes in an array and an element, an array and a string. That you know what? I didn't do a great job documenting this. What is, okay, so an array, I think that's pretty clear. And then an element is going to be a string. So remove element from, actually, let's make this a little clearer. It looks like it's taking a string array, remove element from string array. Now, instead of element, let's call this string. So then I think it's pretty clear that we are looking to accept a string. Yeah, we want an array, we want a string to remove the element. Let's delete that. And we're going to return array. Let's change array. Well, we're changing the actual array here. Let's do this. We're going to make an updated array. so we're actually changing a different variable and we're not modifying this original one, which will make it a little cleaner. So we're going to say const new array equals array. So it's basically a copy of array. And then let's take all these references of array here and just change that to new array. Great. And that change that too. We don't want that. And that needs to also stay as array. So now remove elements from string, new array, first array. Perfect, perfect, perfect. And it's going to return the new array. It makes it a little bit cleaner. All right, let's save that. Let's make sure everything is still working as expected. We saved it. We refresh. New game. And I think the remove was to maybe remove items as you click, or maybe it's to change this number here as you put up flags. Let's make sure that's still working. And it is. So I think that should be good there. Game over works, clicking works, we're great. Up to the next one here, and I'm going to go through the rest of these probably a little faster because I think you can probably see the pattern that's going on here. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll also put a diff of the code that is changed here in the description, so you can check that out and see everything that changed. All right, so next one here, get neighbors, gives the coordinates of all the adjacent squares for a given square. All right, so we're going to say get neighbor coordinates. Perfect. Square ID, I think that is good. Actually, we want it to be consistent, right? So let's call it square location. Perfect, and it returns an array. I think that's just fine. Oh. Perfect. What other comments we have here? Determine the row and column from square ID. And these are things, these types of comments, this is where we can maybe make a named function to remove these comments and make it a little clearer. Instead of saying determine row and column from square ID on either side of C in the string, we could say determine row and column C. But again, we'll do that later. Same thing here. I think these comments are useful for the way it's written now, but we can write it better later. Let's go to the next JSDoc. All right, count surrounding mines. Determine how many mines are in the adjacent squares. I think that's actually the perfect name for that, and I think this description is completely redundant. So let's get that out of there. Square ID, let's change that to square location. And you know, I think square location is good. We use locations in a lot of places. Let's make sure it's consistent. And after I do this, let's see, returns count surrounding mines, returns number. Okay. I think that's good for that one. What I want to do is we're seeing square ID in a lot of places. Let's just make sure that's consistent everywhere. Let's see if there is any other occurrences. I'm doing a search square ID. Oh, there's a bunch of them. Let's just change those right now so we don't forget later. So square ID, we're going to change this to square location. And I'm going to do these one at a time just to be sure. We could do a find and replace all, but I don't, well, I guess it wouldn't be awful because we'd be changing everyone. Let's give that a shot. Let's save it. Let's make sure everything's working. We've made a few changes. Let's make sure we didn't break anything. We save, we refresh, we click some things. Game over works, clicking works, flags work. All right, we're perfect. So let's just do a replace all. We're coming here and we're gonna say anywhere that says square ID, and I'm going to do a quick scroll through, make sure they're all things that I want to actually change, and it does look that way. Perfect. And actually, let's take out these console logs too. As long as we're cleaning stuff up, we don't want console logs in final code. It was probably something I wrote while I was debugging something at some point. We don't want them now. We'll take those out. Cool. Console logs out. Okay. Looking for the square IDs, and we are going to replace them with square location, because that is our new naming standard. Replace all. Perfect. So they are all there. Let's save, and that was kind of a big change, so let's once again. And again, every time I come back here and click, this is something that could really be helped with automated testing, where every time we save, we'd have tests that run and make sure that all these clicks and things are happening. But that's for a later video. Love testing, huge fan, can't wait to do it. So hopefully I'm quarantined long enough to make it happen. We'll see how long this lasts. All right, still works. All square IDs changed to square location. Next one. Let's go back to looking for those JSDocs with the /**. All right, game over. So what does game over do? It exposes all bombs, disables all clickable objects, and shows game over message. I'm going to leave this one here. Let me tell you why. Because this is a lot of information, and that would be a lot to put into the function title. What I think we'll do in the future, as I've mentioned in other places, I think we're going to make better functions to make it clearer. So instead of having to read this description, what you'll see by the time we're done with it in a later video, it's going to say function game over, and it's going to call other functions called disable clickable objects. Stop popping up, VS Code. Disable clickable objects. And show game over message. So you'll see that here. First method, expose bombs. Disable clickable, and I can even show you here. So it'll look like expose bombs, disable clickable objects, and display game over message. And that is the end state we want eventually. And we can just take all this out once we write these functions, and then it's clear that we're just going through and we're doing these things. But we don't have those functions written now, so we're just going to leave this one as is. All right, next one, shuffle. So this is one, clearly it looks like I took it from a CSS tricks article. It shuffles an array. I think we can clear up some of this naming here. The internalness of the function is a little unclear how these are named, like JXI, I don't know what these are or what they're doing. But since this was taken from somewhere else, and we know it's a reliable function, and it is a pure function, it looks like, meaning it takes something, it modifies that something, and returns it without reaching to any outside variables. I'm not too worried about the internals of it here too much. But I just want to make sure it's clear from the outside what it does without worrying about what's going on here. So let's say, so we're saying shuffle. It shuffles an array. We don't have to say that there. If we call it, have to shuffle array. Perfect. And O isn't clear at all, so I want to change that because we're going to be seeing that from the outside. Let's instead call this array to shuffle. Perfect. And again, we're not worried about the internals because that was written by somebody else, and we know it works. So, I'm even going to collapse this. So we just want to know from the outside, can we see what it does? Let's make sure. Let's delete. All right, so this is what it looks like from the outside. Function, shuffle array to shuffle. Cool, it's clear without even looking at the internal code what this is doing. You're going to put an array in, and it's going to be shuffled. And, well, it's not entirely clear if it's going to return it, but we'll leave it as is now. Okay, check win. I think this is going to be similar to the game over, where it does several things, and it's going to be hard to put all this in the title, but we can put these into the functions later. Same thing with things like is every mine flagged. We can make an is every mine flagged function. Uncover any square that's still covered. Cool. And again, it's frustrating because all of this is like, I can see better ways to do all of this. It's all a little messy. But for the purpose of this video, we're removing comments. So focus, Zach. Okay. Uncover. That is another one of those unclear messages. So it uncovers a covered square when the player clicks on it. Okay, so let's instead call this uncover square. And square location is obvious. It's something we use throughout our code. Boom, done there. More internal comments that are helpful but could be changed to a function. How many of these we have left? We have 3. We know 2 of them we're keeping in. That one and that one. All right, so this is the last one here. I didn't even make a description for this one. Generate mine locations. Returns strings noting the locations of mines. Okay, let's take that out because I think that's pretty obvious just from the name, and it's taking in number of rows, number of columns. Okay, I think that's clear enough. We're saying how big is the grid? Okay, generate locations for that grid. Cool, so that was the last JSDoc, and I think all the other comments are good where they are for now. Yep. Okay. I'm just looking through all the different comments here, seeing if there's anything completely unnecessary, but they all look helpful and useful. They all kind of describe what's going on and give an overview, which will help us in refactoring later to know what's going on. So thank you, Past Zach, for keeping us informed. Cool, and that's that. Oh, one more thing I wanted to check. We mentioned on briefly, we want to make sure there's no console logs. We don't want that in production code. There's 2 left here. Let's get rid of that. Get you out of there, get you out of there. Perfect. We'll save. Let's make sure our game is still working. Let's play a quick game. We'll refresh. Let's do this small grid so we can just play a full game here. There we go. We're clicking. We're flagging. Oh, that was a mine. That's a dumb move, Zach. Dumb move. Okay. Perfect. So we know game over, winning, losing, clicking, flagging. It all works. Perfect. So that concludes day 3 of this quarantine code review. Hop in tomorrow, or I guess later today. This is getting posted a little late, but stay tuned as we continue to improve this throughout the quarantine. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, link in the description below for more developer tips and updates on new videos, and get involved in the discussion on Twitter too. COVID Days of Code, let's all kind of get together with this time where we're all trapped inside and maybe help each other grow a little bit and share what we're working on, what we're coding. But anyways, yeah, just thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.